bleeding stranger stumbles into the brownstone at 10:42 p.m., carrying secrets someone is willing to kill for. Now, Wolfe and Archie are dragged into a night where every clue is soaked in danger. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the Visitor, who came for blood. The man who rang our bell at 10:42 p.m. looked like he had recently auditioned for the role of Corpse and made the shortlist. I knew trouble when I saw it. Trouble generally arrived on West 35th in clumsy coats, half-muttered apologies, and a look in its eyes that said it wanted to bleed on my rug. This fellow covered all three categories with room to spare. He leaned against the frame like it was the only thing keeping him vertical, and his right hand was clamped to his ribs, where a neat square of fresh bandage peeked between his fingers. "Good evening," I said, because my mother raised me polite even when the visitor appeared to be losing blood by the pint. "If you planned to faint, the sidewalk was a better choice. It's city property." His eyes, grey, strained and rimmed with fatigue, tracked past my shoulder into the brownstone as if checking to see if death might be waiting inside. Mr. Wolfe," he whispered. "I must speak with Mr. Wolfe, urgently." "So do half the crooks in Manhattan." I caught his elbow before he pitched forward like a poorly managed tent pole. "Come in before you collapse on the stoop and we get sued for emotional damages." He nodded once, tightly, and staggered in. The foyer light hit him full in the face, and the shade of colour he wasn't carrying made me wonder whether we should start heating water and cutting sheets. He clutched a leather portfolio to his chest, with the same affection most men reserve for engagement rings. Because the foyer is sacred ground, Wolfe won't allow strangers to contaminate, especially ones actively dripping. I steered our visitor straight into the office and settled him in the red chair farthest from Wolfe's desk. The distance wasn't for his comfort, it was for the rugs. Wolfe, who had been halfway through a book thick enough to stun an ox, raised his eyes with the expression of a man interrupted by an earthquake. "Archie." "Yes, sir," I said. "He's leaking, but conscious." The man gathered himself and tried to sit straighter. "Mr. Wolfe, thank you for—" "We have not yet done anything worth gratitude," Wolfe cut in, "and state your name." "Leonard Ray," he said, shaking slightly. "I work as a financial investigator for the Helix Foundation. They handle blood research, wartime transfusion studies, private donor programs, motif, medical philanthropy," I muttered for my own notes. I always hoped one day our life would take a glamorous turn. Wolfe shot me a glare that said he was debating the merits of firing me on the spot. Ray swallowed hard. "Someone tried to kill me an hour ago. I believe it's because of what I found, and because of what I brought." He tapped the portfolio. I leaned back against the arm of Wolfe's desk. "If you've got evidence, we should call Kramer before your attacker comes looking to finish the job." That got a reaction. Ray's eyes widened. Panic leapt into them like someone switched on a neon sign. "No police. Not yet. There's a leak. Someone connected to the Foundation, maybe with ties in law enforcement. I can't risk it." Wolfe made a low, irritated sound. "Sir, vague accusations against the constabulary are as tedious as they are dangerous. If you expect aid, be coherent." He reached for the bell cord with one thick finger, ready to summon Fritz for towels or smelling salts, whichever seemed appropriate. I took a better look at Ray's wound. The bandage was new, but the bleeding underneath wasn't subtle. "How long has that been there?" "Since—" Ray hesitated, grimacing. "Since I confronted someone at the Foundation about falsified expenditure ledgers. I'd discovered discrepancies, large ones, the kind you can't explain with clerical errors." Wolfe sighed as though someone had asked him to walk to Brooklyn and back. "Your position?" "I audit private donor endowments, especially restricted blood research funds." He clutched the portfolio tighter. "I gathered the relevant records, hard copies, donor lists, coded payment maps. They're all here. I didn't dare leave them at the office." That set the motif neatly. Elites funding blood research, wartime medical archives, maybe a scandal with enough juice to electrify Manhattan. I could practically hear Lon Cohen warming up his typewriter at the Gazette. Ray's hands twitched. "I came here because you're discreet and thorough, and because someone told me you never take a case unless it's worth solving." "That is a vulgar oversimplification," Wolfe said, "but not entirely false." I asked, "Who shot you?" He shook his head. "I didn't see. A figure in a coat. A service alley behind the foundation tower. They ambushed me. I ran. Running with a bullet in your side? That's ambitious, I said. But the next time you want to visit at this hour, send a telegram first. Wolfe cleared his throat. Archie. Yes, sir? Cease your flippancy. Yes, sir, I said, though I didn't mean it for a second. Wolfe folded his hands, each finger fat and precise. Mr. Ray, you wish my assistance. Very well. I require a retainer. I can pay. Ray reached into his coat with trembling fingers, produced a roll of bills that suggested the blood research community wasn't suffering financially, and dropped it onto Wolfe's blotter. Wolfe examined the roll without touching it. Archie, assess. I peeled back the top bill. $2,000. Clean, unmarked, smells like bank vaults and desperation. Acceptable, Wolfe said. Fritz! Fritz appeared silently at the doorway, the correct and only place he ever did, and took in the bleeding with a look of deep personal offence, as if Ray had insulted the kitchen. Wolfe requested towels and antiseptic. Fritz vanished to fetch them. Ray sagged in his seat. You'll help? Truly? As long as you are candid, Wolfe replied. I will not be deceived. If you attempt to withhold or falsify, I shall terminate our arrangement, I added, and the rug will press charges. Ray tried to smile. It didn't succeed. Wolfe nodded toward the portfolio. Open it. No. Ray hugged it to himself. Not until I tell you everything. That is an inversion of logic, Wolfe said sharply. If its contents are the cause of deadly pursuit, you must secure them, not cling to them. I just... His voice faltered. Sir, Wolfe said, softening by 1/2 of a degree, your injury suggests urgency. Archie will call Dr. Vollmer if need be. But this, he gestured to the portfolio, must be examined. A red herring cropped up then. Ray gasped and said, It's infected. The documents, they're contaminated. I raised a brow. Contaminated how? Anthrax? Bubonic plague? Don't worry, I've had all my shots. Ray shook his head violently. No, not like that. I meant compromised. Some of them may be duplicates or forged to frame someone else. I don't know what's genuine anymore. Wolfe grunted. Then we must determine authenticity. Ray opened his mouth to answer, and then his face went slack. At first I thought he'd simply run out of steam. He'd lost enough blood to fill a respectable soup tureen, but then his eyes rolled upward, and the portfolio slid from his grip. Archie, Wolfe barked. I was already moving. Ray slumped sideways, and I caught him before he hit the floor. His pulse fluttered under my fingertips like a moth slamming itself against a window. Fritz rushed in, arms full of towels. Mein Gott! We may need Vollmer, I said. Wolfe shook his head. First determine if he is conscious. He wasn't. His breathing was shallow but present. There was no fresh blood, nothing dramatic, just a slow descent into the kind of darkness you don't wake up from without help. What did he say earlier? I asked. Shock? Poison? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Both are possible. Both are troublesome. Place him on the couch. When I stretched Ray out on Wolfe's couch, another rug preservation measure, Wolfe leaned heavily back in his chair, brow furrowed. He looked worried, though in Wolfe vocabulary that meant the corners of his mouth curled downward slightly. Should I call Kramer? I asked. No, Wolfe said instantly. Not yet. Mr. Ray insisted upon discretion. Until we know more, we extend him that courtesy. That wasn't like Wolfe. Not exactly. He valued police cooperation even when he pretended he didn't. You sure? Wolfe glared at me. Archie, you will keep your opinions until I request them. He meant he was worried. I'd heard that tone when he wanted to preserve my hide as much as his own. I nodded. Fine, but if this man stops breathing, I'm not signing the paperwork. We worked on stabilizing Ray for a while. Fritz cleaned the wound. Wolfe instructed, supervised, criticized, huffed, and muttered about blood on my upholstery, like a man personally affronted by hemoglobin. Ray stirred faintly, not enough to speak, just enough to prove he was still hanging on, and just enough for Wolfe to scowl at the limits of home medicine. Wolfe signalled with the bell cord. Archie, lock the portfolio in the safe. Then you will take Mr. Ray to the hospital. That was a statement of intent if I ever heard one. Whatever the night would bring, Wolfe had accepted the case. and the danger that came with it. I stored the portfolio, spun the dial, and turned back toward Wolfe. He lifted a brow. "Inform me the moment there is news," he said, "and see that he does not die en route. It would be inconvenient." "You planning to come hold his hand?" I asked. "That'll be the day." "Pfui, go." The office quieted behind me as I headed for the door. Outside, Manhattan kept humming its late-night tune. Inside, the air I left behind was thick with antiseptic, tension, and a case that had already drawn blood. The night felt like a damp towel someone had flung over Manhattan, and I wasn't thrilled to be hauling a semi-conscious Leonard Ray through it. But that's the charm of my profession. Every so often your boss decides you're the designated ambulance. I had him in the Heron and headed toward Midtown ER by 11:03 p.m., doing my best to keep him upright and breathing without dripping too much on the upholstery. If Wolfe ever found blood in the stitching, he'd declare the city unfit for habitation and retreat permanently to his plant rooms. Ray's head lolled against the window. You'll tell him. I didn't exaggerate." "Sure," I said. "I'll also tell him you bled on the doorframe. He'll love that." The ER was a bright, noisy mess of antiseptic, shouting interns, and the soft whimper of people discovering they were mortal. A nurse took one look at Ray and pulled him from my arms with the efficiency of a drill sergeant. A doctor I didn't know ordered tests, stabilization, and x-rays. They didn't want me in the back corridors, so I planted myself in the waiting area, trying not to notice that every seat looked like it had lost a fight with an incontinent gorilla. At 12:06 a.m., a harried resident approached me. "You brought in Mr. Ray?" "That depends," I said. "Is he asking for his tailor or his lawyer?" "He's stable. He's asking for the man who brought him. You." That wasn't ideal. I prefer my near corpses fully conscious before they start making requests. Still, I followed her to a curtained cubicle where Leonard Ray lay pale as skim milk. He managed a rasp. "Tell Wolfe I spoke the truth." "Relax," I said. "The big man accepted your retainer. You're officially one of us, which means we're stuck with you." He gave a faint, miserable nod, the kind a man might offer before signing a document he knows will ruin his life. When the nurse insisted on more tests, I stepped aside and told her I'd return in the morning, never expecting that events would catch up long before sunrise. By the time I got back to the brownstone at 1:18 a.m., my shoes sounded like they'd been soaking in guilt. Pushing through the front door, I was greeted by a sight Wolfe would have labelled sacrilege. Inspector Kramer, sitting in Wolfe's chair like it belonged to him. He was leaning back, cigar butt unlit but clenched between his teeth, glaring like the furniture was personally responsible for his troubles. "Good evening, Inspector," I said. "If you're taking over the office, I'd like my severance in cash." "Can it, Goodwin?" He jabbed a finger toward the rug. "Fritz called me. Blood on the floor. A man shot. Why am I finding this out from your chef?" "He's a chef, not a butler," I said. "And you know Fritz. Blood in the house gives him fits. He wanted the stain removed and the case solved before breakfast." Kramer grunted. "You transported a man with a bullet wound across Manhattan with no police notification." I shrugged. "The alternative was let him bleed out in our office. I could have called you, but he begged me not to." "That's not his call," Kramer said, his tone clipped rather than furious. "A shooting is a shooting, and if anyone under this roof withholds relevant material, I'll drag you in with a subpoena so fast you'll leave skid marks." "That sounds uncomfortable," I said. "Do you offer cushions?" Kramer glared at me, then turned to Wolfe, who was planted in his yellow chair like a mountain that had sprouted arms for convenience. Wolfe set down his book with a thump loud enough to pass for punctuation. "Inspector," he said, "I regret that Mr. Goodwin's actions were hasty, but aiding the injured is not a crime. If you intend to accuse us of misconduct, do it plainly." Kramer puffed on the unlit cigar. "I'm not accusing, I'm informing. If this man dies, every detail you're sitting on becomes police property, like it or not." "I do not sit on details," Wolfe said stiffly. "I cooperate when appropriate." That was the closest thing to mutual respect those two usually exchanged. Any warmer, and they'd have to shake hands. Before Kramer could respond, the phone rang. Fritz, who had been hovering like a guardian angel with a mop, glided to answer and returned with the receiver. "Mr. Goodwin, the hospital." I took it. "Goodwin." "This is Dr. Meyer," a voice said. "Mr. Ray regained consciousness. He's asking for Mr. Wolfe specifically. He refuses to speak to anyone else." Mr. Wolfe doesn't make house calls, I said, or hospital calls, ever. Then Mr. Ray says he'll speak to Mr. Goodwin instead. That, at least, was more manageable. Wolfe motioned sharply for the phone, and I handed it over. "This is Nero Wolfe," he said, voice deep as old oak. "Doctor, is the man's mind sound?" "Lucid, but shaken." "Very well. Mr. Goodwin will be there shortly. Ensure he is allowed access." Wolfe hung up and fixed me with a look. "Archie, go. You will observe and listen. Do not commit to statements or promises." "That's my specialty," I said, observing, listening, and not committing. "Be serious," Wolfe snapped. "You are dealing with men who meddle with blood. Do not be alone with them if you can avoid it." That was Wolfe's version of protectiveness. Short, sharp, and disguised in irritation so no one could accuse him of having feelings. Kramer rose. "Keep me posted," he said to Wolfe, "and don't make me chase you." Wolfe gave a curt nod. Kramer left, not with a slam but a tired shove, which counted as good manners in his dictionary. Back to the ER I went. By 2:07 a.m, the hospital was in its hushed late-night state, half menacing, half sleepy. Nurses moved like ghosts with clipboards. Doctors whispered. Floors gleamed with the smug shine only wax linoleum can achieve. I found Ray in a private cubicle, hooked to an IV, his eyelids drooping like lousy stage curtains. "You came," he murmured. "It's either me or Wolfe, and he doesn't leave the house unless it's on fire," I said. "So talk." He nodded weakly. "The foundation. Money was moving improperly. Disbursements didn't line up. Someone forged donor authorization signatures." His breath hitched. "And there was a memo, coded, from someone called Patient Zero." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a melodramatic pen pal." "It's real," he said urgently. "A benefactor. Anonymous. Influential. Their identity is tied to classified blood research from the war years." "That's a lot of secrecy for someone donating their veins to science," he shuddered. "It's more than that. A set of blood vials, rare antigen samples, went missing last week. Vanished. Those vials could identify people who were supposed to stay hidden." This line of talk set off enough red flags to host a parade. But before I could ask for details, a nurse approached with a syringe. "It's time for his sedation," she said. "Already?" I asked. "He just woke up." She gave me a look fit for a particularly slow student. "Doctor's orders." Ray struggled. "No, wait, I need to—" The plunger went down. His words dissolved into a slurry of consonants. Within 30 seconds, he was out cold again. I eyed the nurse. He didn't seem ready for nap time. "Sir," she said sharply, "this is a hospital. We make medical decisions, not guests." "Believe me," I said, "that's clear." As she left, I noticed 2 men in dark suits standing at the far end of the corridor, pretending to examine a wall-mounted chart. They had the unmistakable posture of people who had never examined a chart in their lives. One of them flicked a glance toward Ray's room, then away too quickly. Red herring or genuine threat? Hard to tell at 2 o'clock in the morning with the scent of iodine fogging your nose. I waited another half hour in case Ray rallied again, but he stayed out. When I left, the 2 suits were gone. Back at the brownstone at 3:04 a.m, Wolfe was sitting exactly where I'd left him, except he had a fresh beer at his elbow. Fritz must have delivered it the moment noon passed somewhere in the world. "Well?" Wolfe demanded. I gave him the rundown, leaving nothing out. Not the vials, not Patient Zero, not the overly enthusiastic sedation. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Premature sedation is suspicious." That was my thought. He drummed his fingers on the armrest. "Mr. Ray's world is that of donors, blood banks, and research finances. Its politics are intricate. You will take care, Archie. Men who deal in blood do not hesitate to spill it." That was twice tonight he'd warned me. If he kept it up, I'd worry he was going soft. "Now," Wolfe said sharply, "the portfolio, bring it." I retrieved it from the safe, placed it on his desk, and stepped back. Wolfe opened it. Inside was a neat stack of blank sheets. Half the contents. Gone. Someone had already been here. Wolfe inhaled sharply. "Confound it," he whispered. "The trail begins poorly." My thoughts exactly. He rang the bell cord. "Archie, lock the house. No one enters until we know more." And that was our suspense hook for the night. I've seen Wolfe skip breakfast only 3 times in my entire career, and one of those was because Fritz had underseasoned the omelette. But on the morning after Leonard Ray's collapse on our office rug, Wolfe sat at the dining room table staring at a plate of shirred eggs as if they were a hostile delegation from a foreign nation. The eggs cooled, the coffee steamed untouched, and Fritz hovered nearby in a state approaching emotional collapse. When Wolfe doesn't eat, Fritz takes it personally. At 9:11 a.m., Wolfe finally pushed back from the table, muttered insoluble before coffee, and retreated to the office. By 9:30, I had our 3 operatives lined up like the world's most eclectic military parade. Saul Panzer, calm under his flat cap, Fred Durkin, already anxious about something unseen, and Ori Cather, wearing the smug look he saves for moments he thinks he'll get first crack at the spotlight. Wolfe surveyed them from behind his desk, fingers steepled. "Gentlemen, our quarry is the Helix Foundation, a medical non-profit of some repute. Blood research, wartime transfusion studies, private donor programs, administrative rot." His lips compressed. "They harbour intrigues more pernicious than cabbage blight." "Sounds glamorous," I said. "Perhaps we'll get matching lab coats." "Archie," Wolfe said, "if you lack the capacity for silence, please feign it." That was Wolfe's affectionate friction for the morning. He passed index cards across the desk with the solemnity of a priest handing out psalms. These contain the names of board members and key personnel, a senator's widow, a Broadway magnate, a reclusive surgeon, and a philanthropic enthusiast for military refrigeration protocols. Fred blinked. "Refrigeration what?" "Blood storage during the war," I told him, "keeping soldiers topped up and ready to go. A cheerful topic for breakfast." Wolfe continued. "Saul, I require you to infiltrate the Foundation as a prospective donor. Their fundraising chairman is highly susceptible to the promise of institutional vanity." Saul nodded. "What's my angle?" "You are Mr. Samuel P. Norton of Philadelphia," Wolfe said, "a widower with an interest in memorializing your late wife through medical philanthropy." Saul shrugged. "I can do bereaved. What about Ori?" Ori scowled. "Yeah, what about me?" "You will shadow a researcher," Wolfe said. "Dr. Christine Lorne. She is head of blood pathology research. Elegant, precise, and reportedly intolerant of interruptions. Your challenge will be not irritating her beyond recovery." Ori muttered something about women scientists being too uptight, and I jabbed him with my elbow. "She'll spot you in 10 seconds if you walk around looking like a man trying to remember his fake name." "I'll manage," he snapped. Wolfe ignored the squabble. "Fred, you will visit the hospital where Mr. Ray is lodged, interview the staff who handled him before and after his arrival, determine if anyone acted irregularly." Fred scratched his head. "Irregular how?" Wolfe gestured disdainfully. "Mr. Durkin, if I could foresee every irregularity in advance, I would already know the culprit. Look for furtive behavior, inconsistent reports, or unusual interest in Mr. Ray's condition." He turned to me. "Archie, you will visit the Helix Foundation Tower, as my legman, not as a meddling interloper." "I prefer professional nuisance, I said. "You will be polite," Wolfe said. "You will request statements. You will observe without provoking." "Define provoking." "Anything you find entertaining," he said darkly. Saul smirked as he gathered his hat. "Sounds like Archie's in danger of becoming respectable." "Phooey!" Wolfe barked. By 10:32 a.m., the War Council dispersed. Saul headed out first, already adopting the gait of a solemn philanthropist. Fred lumbered off toward the ER with the look of a man bracing for a conversation involving too many needles. Ori strode down the front steps, muttering about brilliant women and their egos. Wolfe retreated upstairs for his orchid session, which meant I had precisely 90 minutes to behave myself. I typed notes, arranged the portfolio fragments Wolfe had already analysed, and drank a ginger ale. No milk. This case had enough dairy textures already. At 11:54, Wolfe descended and announced, "Archie, the car." "Going somewhere?" I asked. That'd be news. "You are going," he said, "to the Foundation, before lunch." A scheduling conflict. That told me Wolfe was in earnest. I took the Heron down to Midtown. The Helix Foundation Tower was a sleek glass and steel number that tried to look benevolent and ended up looking like it charged rent to its own reflection. Inside, The lobby gleamed with marble and brass, the kind of decor designed to reassure donors that their money funded important scientific breakthroughs and excellent janitorial services. I approached the reception desk, where a young woman with perfect posture and an expression carved from ice regarded me. "May I help you?" "Archie Goodwin," I said. "I'm here to inquire about a recent incident involving one of your employees, Leonard Ray." Her expression chilled further. "Mr. Ray is on medical leave." "So I hear. That's why I'd like to speak with someone in authority." She directed me to the 8th floor, where research and administration shared space like two rival tenants forced into a shotgun marriage. The elevator doors opened onto a corridor lined with framed photos of scientists posing next to complicated-looking machines. I found the office of Dr. Christine Lorne. A plaque on the door declared her Director of Experimental Hematology, which sounded like a title that could get you invited to interesting cocktail parties. She opened the door herself when I knocked. Tall, immaculate, hair pinned with the precision of a blueprint, she looked like she could sterilize a lab with a single glare. "Dr. Lorne?" I asked. "Yes, you are." "Archie Goodwin. I'm looking into a matter involving Leonard Ray." Her eyes sharpened. "His condition?" "Recovering." She exhaled, just barely. "What do you want to know?" "How he got shot." "Mr. Goodwin," she said coldly, "I am a scientist, not a clairvoyant. I analyze blood, not bullets." A red herring if I ever heard one. She was too quick to distance herself. She allowed me inside. Her office looked like a cross between a chemistry lab and a high-end jeweler's vault. Papers aligned perfectly, instruments gleaming, cabinets locked. "I understand Mr. Ray had access to financial records," I said. She adjusted her glasses. "He reviewed grant disbursements, routine compliance." He seemed to think otherwise. She gave me a long, measured look. "Mr. Ray was excitable." "Shot men often are." She turned away. "If you wish to speak with our financial officer, Philip March handles donor accounts." "And where do I find him?" "2 doors down." March's office smelled like stress and cigarettes. The man himself was wiry, with nicotine-stained fingers tapping frantically on a calculator. When I introduced myself, he stiffened like I'd pulled a gun. "Leonard Ray is alive," I said casually. His face drained. "Alive?" "Surprised?" "No," he said too quickly. "Just relieved." Sure he was. His fingers kept twitching like they were trying to escape his hands. I let him sweat and strolled toward the lab wing. On my way, I encountered a third suspect, Marion Vance, the glamorous widow philanthropist whose portraits hung around the lobby like glamour shots for the wealthy elite. In person, she was better dressed and even more amused. "You're not one of our researchers," she said. "No, ma'am, though I could be persuaded to donate blood if the refreshments are good." She laughed lightly. "Do thank Mr. Wolfe for his interest. We always enjoy seeing him stir." I left her with that enigmatic smile and headed into the lab wing, where stainless steel equipment hummed like a futuristic symphony. A technician in a lab coat almost collided with me, apologized profusely, and scurried away with a clipboard held like a shield. That's when I noticed it. A heavy, reinforced door marked refrigerated storage, authorized personnel only. The lock panel blinked green. Someone had accessed it recently. A printed log hung beside it showing the last entry, Ray L. 22:04 hours, the same night he was attacked. But according to the hospital timeline, Ray had been in an alley at 10:15 getting perforated. He couldn't have been here at 10:04. Someone had used his ID. A lab assistant passed by, and I asked casually, "Who has access to this room?" "Only senior staff," he said. "Dr. Lorne, Mr. Ray, and a few others." "And they log in manually?" "Yes. The system prints every entry." I pretended to admire the steel hinges. "What's inside?" "Blood samples," he said. "Rare antigens. Historical vials from wartime programs." That set the motif humming like a tuning fork. I thanked him, headed back to the elevators, and let the weight of the clue roll around my mind like a marble in a tin cup. By the time I reached the brownstone at 4:02 p.m., Wolfe was waiting with the portfolio spread open on his desk, like a cadaver ready for autopsy. "Well?" he demanded. "Plenty," I said. But the highlight of the tour was that someone used Ray's ID to access refrigerated storage after he'd already been shot. Wolfe closed his eyes. "Confound it. The attack was intended to retrieve evidence from this portfolio, and someone now wishes to know what we have. I nodded. I also met 3 potential headaches: a scientist, a nervous accountant, and a widow who smirks like she knows something. Wolfe grunted. I added, and I ordered 10 pounds of blood oranges. The glare he gave me could have chilled lava. The next morning, the sky over Midtown had the colour and charm of old dishwater when I headed back to the hospital, and I wasn't expecting sunshine inside either. Hospitals usually smell like iodine, despair, and coffee brewed by someone who hates humanity. But when the revolving doors spun me in at 9:48 a.m, I walked straight into controlled chaos: nurses shouting orders, an overturned medication tray, and a security guard clutching his shoulder like someone had just tried to turn him into a pincushion. That was my first hint the day had set its sights on mischief. Before I could get my bearings, a nurse with a tight bun and tighter expression grabbed my sleeve. "Are you Mr. Goodwin?" "I answer to it," I said. "What's the ruckus?" "Another attack on your Mr. Ray. He's alive because I interrupted, but the assailant fled." I didn't wait for permission. I sprinted down the corridor, past patients gawking from behind curtain gaps. Ray's cubicle looked like a hurricane had auditioned inside it. The IV stand was toppled, the clipboard shattered, and a metal tray lay on the floor with instruments scattered like pickup sticks. "Where is he?" I demanded. She pointed. Ray lay slumped on the bed, breathing but shaken enough to make a leaf in November look sturdy. A bruise already darkened one cheek, and the restraints they'd used to hold his arm for a blood draw dangled uselessly. "Which way did the clown run?" I asked. "Fire exit," she said, "down that hall." I bolted, pushing through the door so fast it banged against the wall. A staircase spiraled downward, smelling faintly of detergent and panic. I descended 4 flights in 3 bounds and burst into an alley slick with rain. A shadow darted around the far corner, tall, coat flapping, moving like a man who had trained for exactly this scenario. I took off after him. The alley was a test in traction I hadn't signed up for. My shoes skidded on wet concrete. I nearly kissed a trash can at high speed. By the time I rounded the corner, the figure was already half a block ahead. He turned once, giving me just enough of a profile to guess he wasn't Ray's doctor or a Good Samaritan volunteer. "Hey!" I shouted, because that always works in detective stories written by optimists. He didn't slow. The rain came harder, a curtain blurring the streetlights. I pushed myself, lungs burning, but the pavement pooled under my shoes and the city conspired against me. A cab rocketed through a puddle and drenched me from belt to socks. When I wiped my eyes, the figure was gone. Vanished into Manhattan's digestive system, where trouble is digested but never eliminated. By the time I trudged back up the fire stairs, dripping like a neglected plant, Inspector Kramer was already there, scowling at the toppled IV stand as though it had personally offended New York law. He whipped around the moment he saw me. "Goodwin," he growled, cigar clenched but unlit. "Why is it every time you show up, somebody either gets shot or tries to finish the job?" "It's a gift," I said. "Some men juggle. I attract killers." "Cut it out." He jabbed a finger at my chest. 2 attacks on the same man, both when you're around. My department is going to think you're running a discount hitman service. "If your department fixed its leaks," I fired back, "maybe the shooters wouldn't know when Ray's alone." "Did you ever consider you've got more holes than a thrift store umbrella?" His jaw flexed. The nurse winced. But instead of exploding, Kramer let out a sound that was half snarl, half sigh. "As much as it pains me to admit it, Wolfe probably saved that man's life by sending you back here. Twice." Compliments from Kramer come wrapped in barbed wire, but they count. A doctor arrived to check on Ray. "He'll be fine," he told us. "Bruised, shaken, but stable." We startled the intruder, likely avoided a fatality. "That's my favorite kind of avoided fatality," I said. Kramer shot me a glare for seasoning. Once they cleared us for a quick word, I stepped to Ray's bedside. He looked like a burst balloon that decided to keep existing out of spite. "You picked a bad week to quit knitting," I said gently. "You okay?" He swallowed. "Goodwin, they're desperate." I noticed. I lowered my voice. "Who was it?" He shook his head weakly. "Didn't see, but they won't stop." He reached for something invisible, then clawed at my sleeve. "You must tell Wolfe. Protect the ledger." "What ledger?" "The transfusion ledger. His eyes burned with fevered urgency. The last true copy, handwritten, wartime donor records. If they get it, everything collapses. Where is it? I hid it, he said faintly. But they know I still have pieces. They need them destroyed. He fumbled with his free hand, dragging it across the sheet until his fingers hit his pillowcase. From beneath it, he tugged out a tiny folded slip of paper. Hospital contraband, an encouraging sign he wasn't completely helpless. He pushed it toward me. I opened it. One line stared back. Ask Wolfe about patient 0. I looked at him. His eyes were already closing again. Ray, I said, what the hell does... But he was out, drifting into a medicated haze. The doctor returned and gave me a shove with his eyebrows. Time to leave. Kramer walked beside me as we exited the cubicle. What did he tell you? He asked. Get a subpoena, I said automatically. Kramer didn't bark. He didn't even twitch. He just let out a breath like he'd been holding in 3 days of frustration. Goodwin, I'm trying to keep this from turning into a war with your boss. Don't make me regret being reasonable. That was the closest thing to diplomacy Kramer had ever attempted in my presence. I softened my tone by a micron. Look, Inspector, someone's trying hard to tidy up something old and dirty. Wolfe won't sit on it forever. Let us get our bearings before you go nuclear. He grunted. All right, Wolfe gets 12 hours. Tell him that. After that, I'm coming in with the DA's blessing and a mop. And with that respectful exit line, rare enough to bottle and sell, he stormed off down the hall. I didn't go straight home. I walked the hospital corridors again, watching shadows cling to corners and wondering whether the 2 suits from the night before had been red herrings or the opening credits of a homicide double feature. A janitor eyed me suspiciously, which suggested he might be the guilty party, except he also eyed the vending machine the same way, proving he was just underpaid. Finally, I returned to the brownstone at 11:58 a.m., tracking enough leftover rain to spot me from space. Wolfe was in the office, seated with a book open but clearly unread. His expression shifted from irritation to something closer to alarm the moment he saw my soaked suit. What happened? He demanded. Oh, nothing, I said. Hospital tour, spontaneous foot race, attempted murder, the usual. Archie. His voice cut through the room like a scalpel dipped in scorn. Explain. I did, point by point, starting with the overturned IV stand and ending with patient 0. By the time I finished, Wolfe's face was set like old marble. Confound their audacity, he muttered. Interfering with my case twice? He slapped the armrest. Twice. What bothers you more? I asked. That they attacked him, or that they did it while I was there? Wolfe scowled. Both, equally. And I will not have you placed in jeopardy because fools are reckless. You will not go anywhere unaccompanied for the next 24 hours. That's touching, I said, like a mother hen with a beer belly. Phooey, Wolfe snapped. There it was, affection disguised as disdain, the Wolfe version of a Hallmark card. Before either of us could continue the sentimental bickering, the phone rang. Wolfe yanked the cord and I answered. Goodwin. Saul Pantzer's calm voice greeted me. Archie, you'd better tell Wolfe. Someone's shredding files at the Foundation. A lot of them, and fast. I turned toward Wolfe. Saul says we've got a bonfire without flames. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Archie, tell Mr. Pantzer, save what he can. I relayed it. Saul hung up. Wolfe exhaled a long, heavy breath like a man preparing to uproot a forest one tree at a time. The case had officially shifted gears, and the engine wasn't slowing down. If there's one thing I've learned about charity galas, it's that they're less about charity and more about watching rich people congratulate each other for being rich. The Helix Foundation's penthouse suite was the crown jewel of that philosophy, a sprawling glass palace perched above Midtown, twinkling with chandeliers that probably cost more than my yearly salary. By the time Saul Panzer and I stepped out of the private elevator at 8:03 p.m., the place was already brimming with tuxedos, gowns, and enough perfume to suffocate a small elephant. I tugged at my collar, which was trying to strangle me. Tuxedos, I muttered to Saul, were invented so men could hide how uncomfortable they are. Saul, who looked perfectly relaxed in his, smirked. Good thing you were born to suffer. I ignored him and surveyed the room. Champagne flutes glittered in dozens of hands. String quartets played polite music that begged people to pretend they had culture. Above everything hung the scent of money, old, new, and questionably acquired. A hostess approached, smiling with the warmth of a tax auditor. "Welcome, gentlemen. Donor badges?" Saul, playing the part of somber widower philanthropist, produced his forged credentials with the finesse of a man who could bluff the devil. I handed over my card, which identified me as Mr. Goodwin, Guest Research Liaison. I wasn't sure what that meant, but neither was anyone else, which made it perfect. Once inside, our mission was simple: mingle, observe, and try not to spill champagne on anyone important. We began with Marion Vance, the widow philanthropist whose portraits practically decorated half the building. Tonight she wore a silver gown that could have blinded a lighthouse keeper at 20 paces. She greeted us with an amused curve of her lips. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. "Back so soon? Don't tell me you've joined our donor circle." "Not unless you count emotional donations," I said. "I give generously in sarcasm." She laughed, a soft, melodic sound that made nearby men crane their necks. "Do enjoy yourself," she said. "Not everything in life needs to be investigative." With that cryptic remark, she moved toward a young research tech loitering by a sculpture that resembled a chrome pretzel. I watched as she slipped him a small envelope. "Suspicious?" Saul murmured beside me. "Depends," I said. "Could be a payoff, could be a thank you note, could be a coupon for half-price plasma testing." Saul snorted. I tailed the tech for a few minutes, keeping to the edges. He ducked into a side corridor, tore open the envelope, and pulled out a check. I sidled near and peeked discreetly. It was a donation earmark, exactly what the Helix Foundation prided itself on. No hidden codes, no blood samples, no treason. Red herring number 1, neatly grilled and served. Saul headed toward the bar to keep an eye on the executive clique, while I drifted toward the financial wing of the crowd. That's where I spotted Philip March, the Foundation's jittery accountant. He looked like a man who'd lost a bet with a razor and was terrified someone might ask him about it. His tie was crooked, his eyes darted, and the moment he recognized me, he bolted toward the balcony. "Subtle," I muttered, and followed. March pushed through the glass doors into the cool night air. I closed the distance, but before I could catch him, someone else appeared, an unshaven man in a cheap suit, waving a slip of paper like it was a holy relic. "You owe me, March," he barked. "And tonight's the deadline." March yelped and tried to hide behind a potted fern. When he saw me coming, he panicked full scale. "Mr. Goodwin has nothing to do with this." The debt collector glared at me. "Unless you're paying his tab, butt out." I held up my hands. "Don't mind me. I'm just enjoying the breeze." The confrontation fizzled when security arrived and dragged the collector off, muttering threats about IOUs. March squeaked apologies, sweating enough to irrigate a garden. So false lead number 2 was accounted for. March was paranoid, but for financial reasons that had nothing to do with dead scientists or stolen blood. Back inside, the party had reached its crescendo. Waiters circulated with caviar canapes. Men with medals shouted about wartime glory. Women whispered behind feathered fans. It was a spectacle in the truest sense, dramatic, opulent, and entirely fraudulent. At 9:14 p.m., something shifted. A ripple moved through the room, quiet but unmistakable. Conversations paused, heads turned. A security guard whispered into a lapel mic and began moving with purpose. Saul appeared beside me like a miracle. "Something's wrong," he said simply. "How wrong?" "Follow me." He led me through a side hallway toward a wing marked Administrative Offices, Authorized Staff Only. A guard stood outside, flustered. "Party's private, gentlemen." Saul flashed him the forged donor card and said, "The board requested us." The guard stepped aside. Inside, the lighting changed. The warm glow of the gala faded into the cold, sterile luminescence of an institution that dealt in secrets. A door halfway down the hall was locked. Another guard fiddled with a keycard, muttering curses. When he finally forced it open, the smell hit us first, a faint metallic scent mixed with antiseptic. Wrong. Very wrong. Dr. Avery Holt lay crumpled on the carpet, his body twisted unnaturally, head at an angle a healthy spine wouldn't permit. A thin bruise darkened the side of his neck, a single precise strike to the carotid. Quick, clinical, efficient. This wasn't a brawl, it was an execution. Saul knelt to check the pulse he already knew wasn't there. "Dead," he murmured. I scanned the room. Papers scattered, a chair overturned, A locked drawer forced. Someone had been searching and found something, or failed to. "He was arguing with someone earlier," a voice said from behind us. We turned. Dr. Christine Lawn stood there, face pale but controlled, arms folded tight. Holt told me he confronted a staff member about unauthorized extractions. "Extractions?" I asked. She nodded grimly. "Blood. Someone removed vials from cold storage last week without logging them." "And Holt knew?" Saul asked. "He suspected, and he said Leonard Ray knew even more." Well, that was encouraging. Ray had enough enemies for a small parade. I crouched beside Holt's body and examined his sleeve. A dark smear curved along the cuff. Something slick, faintly iridescent. Refrigerant oil, the kind used in industrial-grade blood storage units. "Interesting," I murmured, brushing my thumb lightly against it. I'd get a photostat sample later. Original evidence belonged to Kramer. Saul and I exchanged a look. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone who knew the vaults, who knew the research, who knew the stakes. Someone inside the Foundation. The Foundation director burst in then, screaming about scandal, liability, public relations. Her anxiety was loud enough to call seismologists. But before she could finish, the doors to the wing swung open again. Inspector Kramer marched in, cigar jutting sideways like a punctuation mark. For once, he didn't bother with insults. "Saul, Goodwin." He surveyed the corpse. "I'm guessing Wolfe sent you." "He did," Saul said simply. "Well," Kramer grunted, "for once I'm damn glad he did." The forensic team arrived. Photographers snapped shots. Statements were taken. Lawn repeated the confrontation story. March, red-eyed, claimed he'd been nowhere near the office. Marion Vance wrung her hand so gracefully it looked choreographed. Kramer pulled me aside. "You find anything?" "I find plenty," I said. "But you know Wolfe." He nodded. 12 hours, Goodwin. Then the DA moves in." Fair enough. By the time Saul and I left the gala at 10:52 p.m., the evening had transformed from glitzy fundraiser to homicide crime scene. The penthouse air felt heavier, as though the building itself resented the shift in mood. Saul and I headed back to the brownstone, silent during most of the cab ride. At 11:27 p.m., we stepped into the office where Wolfe was waiting with a glare that could curdle glass. "Well?" he demanded. "We went for champagne," I said. "We came back with murder." Wolfe grunted. "Explain." I did. Holt, the bruise, the refrigerant smear, the locked room, the red herrings, the envelope, the debt collector. As I spoke, Wolfe's expression changed. Not just irritation, but something more alert, analytical, hungry. When I finished, he closed his eyes. "Confound it. This requires immediate containment." "You planning to gut a trout the size of Manhattan?" I asked. He ignored me. "We convene tomorrow morning. All operatives return. The pattern is emerging." As final punctuation, Fritz appeared bearing a tray. Supper, precisely at 8 o'clock p.m., now hours cold. Wolfe dismissed him with a wave, too absorbed in strategy to care about food. That's how I knew things were serious. The night closed with a ritual ending. Wolfe gripping the arms of his chair, eyes narrowed in concentration, already assembling suspects like chess pieces. The war was officially on. If there's a sound that tells you a day is going downhill before it starts, it's the thump of Nero Wolfe lowering himself into his office chair at 9:05 a.m., with the weariness of a Roman emperor forced to negotiate with barbarians. That's how the morning began. Wolfe grim, eyes narrowed, and coffee untouched. Fritz hovered nearby with a tray like a concerned parent deciding whether the patient could handle solids. Outside, Manhattan hummed its weekday tune. Inside the brownstone, the world was about to tilt again. At 9:11 sharp, Wolfe hit the bell cord. "Archie, assemble them." Then meant the full roster. Saul Panzer, Ori Cather, and Fred Durkin, our investigative infantry. By 9:30, they were all lined up in Wolfe's office like the starting lineup of a very poorly funded baseball team. Wolfe glared at us as if we'd committed crimes against logic simply by existing. He motioned to the chairs. "Gentlemen, the phrase before us is patient zero. I require your attention." Ori yawned. Fred scratched his chin. Saul, of course, simply adjusted his flat cap, ready to absorb anything Wolfe threw at him. Wolfe continued. During the war, medical researchers identified a classified donor with an exceedingly rare antigen profile. This donor, anonymous, heavily protected, enabled the development of universal transfusion protocols used in battlefield hospitals. He paused, letting that settle. The code name for this individual was Patient Zero. Their identity was concealed to protect them from black market exploitation. I whistled softly. So our foundation has a secret celebrity in cold storage? Pfui, Wolfe's lip curled. Not a celebrity, a resource. And resources are exploited. He steepled his fingers. Leonard Ray suspected the Helix Foundation was falsifying records to obscure misuse of this donor's blood, possibly selling rare antigen vials to private buyers. The transfusion ledger, now missing, would expose those responsible. Ori leaned forward. So whoever hit Ray was trying to bury the past. And silence the future, Saul added. Wolfe nodded once. Precisely. He turned to me. Archie, you will visit Mrs. Marion Vance. Again. She'll be thrilled, I said. She probably has a fainting couch reserved for me. Take care, Wolfe warned. That woman is adept at camouflage. At least she smells nicer than refrigerated storage rooms. Wolfe ignored that. Report back before lunch. Lunch at 1 o'clock sharp, Wolfe's anchor in a turbulent universe, meant I had about 3 hours to dance with a widow who collected influence the way other women collected brooches. Marion Vance lived in a penthouse that resembled the afterlife heaven would give to wealthy socialites. Marble floors, velvet drapes, an art collection that probably required its own insurance office. She opened the door herself, wearing a navy silk robe and a knowing smile. Mr. Goodwin, do come in. You look as though you've been trotting after villains. That's my day job, I said. My night job is annoying geniuses. She laughed. Nero Wolfe sent you, I presume. Sent is a strong word. Nudged. She led me into a sitting room that smelled faintly of jasmine and bold financial choices. I settled into a chair that probably cost more than my monthly rent. So, she said, perching gracefully on the sofa's edge, you're here about donors. You suspect I'm here about anything else? Men rarely visit without wanting something, she said lightly. What does Wolfe want? Information, particularly about wartime donors. Anyone special. Her expression cooled by a degree. Special is a dangerous word. Danger's my middle name. Really? No, it's Calvin, but I try not to discuss that. A reluctant smile crept onto her lips. Mr. Goodwin, I cannot discuss wartime donor files. Some were politically significant, others were protected for their own safety. Protected from what? From exposure, she said, from exploitation, from those who would use their blood as a weapon or a bargaining chip. She hesitated, eyes drifting toward a window shimmering with sunlight. And from shame. That last word caught my attention. Shame isn't the kind of word philanthropists toss around. Something in her tone suggested she knew more than she wanted to share. I leaned back. Look, Mrs. Vance, Wolfe has a soft spot for damsels with diamond earrings. If you're worried about your name in the press, he can keep things discreet. She laughed, softly, bitterly. I am not a damsel, and diamonds are not armour. Then she straightened. Mr. Goodwin, unless Nero Wolfe offers formal protection, I cannot offer more. Meaning she had something to hide, but without Wolfe's guarantee, her lips were locked. I left with nothing solid, just a perfume trail and a growing suspicion she was knitting secrets into that silk robe. Back at the brownstone, I found Saul waiting in the office. Fred sat on the red chair looking anxious, and Ori leaned against the wall looking bored. Saul spoke first. Philip March bought a ticket to Havana under the name Carl Morris at 6 a.m. this morning. Running? I asked. Maybe, but he hasn't used it yet. Ori chimed in. I checked Christine Lawn's badge activity. The night Ray was attacked the first time, someone used his ID to access the refrigerated vault. But the next day, Lawn used his badge too. She's the head of research, Fred noted. Maybe she was doing paperwork. Or maybe she's swimming in our suspect pool, I said. Fred cleared his throat. I talked to Holt's banker. No unusual withdrawals, no sudden wealth, nothing shady. So Holt hadn't been bribed. That removed a theory and replaced it with a headache. I looked at Wolfe, who was just settling into his chair for Fritz's lunch delivery. Veal in cream sauce, asparagus, and potatoes arranged like miniature city blocks. Wolfe ate methodically while I relayed everything. Marion's careful vagueness, March's attempted escape, Lawn's suspicious ID use. When I finished, Wolfe dabbed his lips with his napkin. "Archie, you have brought threads without cloth." "That's rude," I said. "True, but rude," he scowled. "It means you have information but no cohesion, no structure." Then, with a surprisingly gentle tone, he added, "You will not pursue any suspect alone. Do you understand?" That sounded like concern, I said. "Should I take my temperature?" "Confound you." There it was, classic Wolfe affection disguised as irritation. Fritz reappeared to clear lunch. Wolfe waved him away and reached for his beer. I took a seat opposite him and began drafting notes on a pad. The words "Patient Zero" stared up at me like a wartime ghost refusing burial. At 2:43 p.m. the doorbell rang. Fritz would never answer the door. He'd rather scrub an already clean pan. So I went. On the stoop, wearing a rumpled coat and an expression of professional exhaustion, stood Inspector Kramer. "Goodwin," he said. "I need Wolfe." "Come in," I said. "He's digesting but conscious." Kramer stepped inside, removing his hat. He walked into the office without prompting. Wolfe glared but didn't stand. Kramer took the guest chair and placed his cigar on the armrest. "I'm not here to bark," Kramer said. "The DA's breathing down my neck. The press is sniffing around the Holt murder, and the Foundation's board wants a scapegoat by tomorrow." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "You expect me to volunteer?" "I expect you to cooperate," Kramer replied. "Something's rotten in that place, and I think you're closer to it than I am." This was that once-a-case moment, respect wrapped in gruffness. Wolfe inhaled, exhaled, and said, "Inspector, you press me too soon. I lack sufficient facts." Kramer scowled. "You usually claim to see farther than we do." "I see enough to know the Foundation is diseased," Wolfe said, "but until I can name the organ, I will not prescribe surgery." Kramer snorted. "Plain English, Wolfe." "Plain enough," Wolfe replied. "When I have something you can use, you will have it." Kramer stood. "All right. I'll hold off the DA for a little while." He left without slamming the door, a miracle worth celebrating. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half-lidded, mind already stitching secrets together. I watched him, knowing a storm was coming, and we were standing dead center. If a man ever tells you stakeouts are glamorous, he's either lying or trying to sell you a mattress. By the time Saul Panzer and I settled into the darkened hallway outside the Helix Foundation's refrigerated storage wing at 7:02 p.m., my feet were numb, my patience was brittle, and the overhead vent had been blowing Arctic air at my neck for so long I was considering filing a complaint with the Geneva Convention. Saul tolerated it with monk-like calm. I tried to match him, but the hall smelled faintly of disinfectant, cold metal, and the general aroma of people who spend too much time around microscopes. Even I have limits. We were there because someone had used Leonard Ray's ID badge again, this time during a restricted period. Saul spotted the pattern, I supplied the sass, and Wolfe sent us with strict instructions. Observe without intruding. The guilty betray themselves without your assistance. Wolfe loves phrases like that. They make him sound like Socrates with a beer belly. At 7:18 p.m., movement finally arrived. Christine Lorne, cool, crisp, probably capable of performing surgery while knitting lace, stepped into the corridor. She checked over her shoulder twice, then waited. 30 seconds later, Philip March appeared, looking like a cat who had swallowed a canary, and now suspected the canary was poisonous. His eyes darted everywhere except at her face. Saul nudged me. I already had my camera ready. Certified film, time-stamped. Nothing that would get Wolfe accused of evidence tampering. I snapped a photo the moment March handed her a small envelope. They argued in whispers, too low for us to hear, but gestures said plenty. Lorne jabbing a finger toward the vault door, March shaking his head violently, both of them stiff with panic. It lasted a minute, maybe less, before she tucked the envelope into her coat and marched away with the confidence of a woman who knew exactly where the bodies were buried, but preferred they stay put. I leaned toward Saul. That's either a love letter or evidence of the century. Not love, Saul murmured, too tense. He was right. If that was romance, I'd swear off women forever. Before we could approach March, alarms erupted throughout the floor, shrill, insistent, and about as subtle as Stebbins with a warrant. Red lights flashed. Doors slammed shut automatically. The refrigerated vault's emergency system had triggered. "Someone's inside," Saul said. We ran. Cold vapor puffed from the vault's open hatch like the breath of an angry glacier. Inside, racks of blood vials stood neatly, except for one corner where someone had splashed solvent across stacks of labelled record binders. The air reeked of chemical burn. Pages curled and blackened. Whoever did it had tried to erase history. As I edged around the puddle, a shadow darted from behind a shelf. Saul lunged. What followed resembled a dance choreographed by amateurs. Saul grabbing, the figure slipping, me blocking the path, the figure slipping again. When the dust settled, Saul had him pinned. It was Marion Vance's research tech, the chrome pretzel boy. "What the hell?" I asked. His eyes bulged behind thick glasses. "I was paid. I swear. I didn't know what was in those binders." "Who paid you?" He gulped. "A man in a grey hat. He left the cash in an envelope with instructions, that's all I know. Red herring number 1 for the night, but a juicy one. We dragged him to security, but before anyone could argue jurisdiction, the elevator pinged and Inspector Kramer strode out, scowl loaded. He'd beaten me to irritation by a mile. "Goodwin," he snapped. "Every time you show up, someone gets assaulted or something explodes." "Tonight it's documents," I said. "We're expanding our portfolio." Kramer's cigar twitched. "Saul, tell me you didn't break the assailant's ribs." Saul shook his head. "No injuries, just panic." Kramer inspected the tech. "You willing to sign a statement?" Yes, just get me out of here." It was too easy, too clean, too stupid. This kid wasn't the mastermind. He barely knew which end of a microscope to look through. Kramer took him into custody with surprising gentleness. "You two head back to Wolfe," he said. "I'll handle this." I doubted he meant it as teamwork, but it was the closest he'd come to a thank you in months. We hadn't been back at the brownstone a full hour when the phone rang. I grabbed it instinctively. "Goodwin," I said. The voice belonged to Kramer, but not the version who yelled. This one sounded stripped down, bare, tired, almost human. "Archie," he said. "I'm calling because, hell, Leonard Ray just died." My grip tightened. "What? He was recovering." "Suddenly. Collapsed this afternoon. Doctor thinks poison. Something subtle. We'll confirm with tox." "Poisoned," I said slowly. "Inside the hospital." "I'm sorry," Kramer said, genuinely. "I thought you and Wolfe needed to hear it first." He hung up before I could reply. I stared at the phone like it had insulted my mother. Wolfe was in the office reading a monograph on tropical orchids. I stepped inside and closed the door with a finality that made him glance up sharply. "Leonard Ray is dead," I said. Wolfe froze. Not dramatically, just absolutely. Stillness poured over him like cement. For several seconds he didn't blink or breathe. Then he spoke so quietly I barely heard. "How?" "Poison. Hospital thinks so." Wolfe set the book aside. "When?" "Today. Not long ago." His jaw tightened. He looked at the floor as if calculating how many lives had now been wasted through incompetence or greed. Then he turned to me with something that almost resembled remorse. "I should not have let you near that hospital alone. I wasn't the one poisoned, if that helps." "It does not." "I'll bring flowers to my own funeral," I offered. "You can glare at them." "Archie." The single word carried more weight than a ton of marble. I shut up. He motioned me closer. "Explain everything since you left the Foundation." I did. The corridor meeting, the envelope, the solvent attack, the tech's confession. Wolfe listened with the solemnity of a man appraising the wreckage of a sacred library. When I finished, he drummed his fingers. 2 betrayals, he said. First, destruction of evidence. Second, murder disguised as medical calamity. And we're still blind. Not entirely. He rose, a rare lunar event. "Fred." Fred Durkin lumbered in from the dining room doorway as if he'd been listening closely enough to pretend he hadn't. "What you got?" I asked. Fred cleared his throat. "Holt, the dead board member, had been getting money, regular payments. Didn't come from the Foundation. Came through one of Marion Vance's charitable accounts." My eyebrows shot up. "So Holt wasn't a martyr. He was selling donor access." Fred nodded. "Looks like it." Another betrayal, wrapped in a different bow. Wolfe rubbed his temple. "So, Holt sold access. Someone bought it. Leonard tried to expose them. Someone eliminated both truth and witness." "Christine Lorne," I suggested. "Possibly," Wolfe murmured. "But March is running, Marion Vance is evasive, and someone at the hospital is compromised." "Take a number," I said. "The suspect list could fill Yankee Stadium." Your levity, Wolfe snapped, is ill-timed. That's because danger makes me charming. Phooey. He sank back into his chair. Archie, summon all suspects tomorrow morning. I will announce a time. They will attend. You going full court press? This is not sport, Wolfe growled. This is butchery. Fritz appeared at the doorway holding a tray with fresh beer. Wolfe accepted the chilled glass and took a long, bracing drink. When Wolfe drinks before dinner, the world is ending. You planning to call Kramer? I asked. I do not plan, Wolfe said. He will come. Right on cue, the doorbell rang. I raised a brow. New talent? Get it, Wolfe ordered. I answered. Kramer stood under the porch light, hat pulled low against the wind. Goodwin, he said, we need Wolfe. He's in the mood for human sacrifice, I warned. Enter at your own risk. Kramer brushed past and entered the office. Wolfe didn't rise, but he didn't scowl either. Kramer sat. We're stretched thin, he admitted. The DA wants answers. I need your help. I'm not here to fight. Wolfe studied him with ancient scrutiny. Then he spoke, slow and resonant. Inspector, the killer fears a dead man's blood more than any living witness. Kramer frowned. Meaning? It means, Wolfe said, that their secret lies in what was taken, not what was said. Kramer stood. All right, Wolfe, I'll wait for your report. And without another word, he left. Wolfe closed his eyes, thinking. Outside, the wind howled like a warning. Tomorrow, the reckoning would begin. If you've never seen 6 people walk willingly into Nero Wolfe's office knowing they might leave in handcuffs, you've missed a uniquely American spectacle. By 6:57 p.m., the brownstone looked less like a home and more like a courtroom decorated by a man with strong feelings about symmetry and orchids. The air was thick with tension and money, because the suspects from the Helix Foundation arrived dressed like they were attending their own acquittals. Christine Lorne entered first, cool as a refrigerated scalpel. Philip March followed, twitching at shadows that weren't even trying to hide. Marion Vance glided in, draped in a satin stole and enough perfume to tax the ventilation system. The research tech looked like a kid called to the principal's office with no idea which rule he'd broken. 2 board members trailed behind, all pearls and self-importance. Kramer occupied a side chair, cigar unlit but clenched like a restraining order. The dining room doors were shut, Fritz's doing. When Fritz closed doors, it meant Wolfe expected confessions, revelations, or screaming, preferably all 3. I stood near Wolfe's desk, notebook ready, cuffs handy if needed, and a wisecrack preloaded in case morale dipped. Wolfe surveyed the room like a judge whose patience had expiration dates. Thank you for attending, he said, voice smooth and grave. We shall conclude this unpleasant affair. Christine crossed her legs. Mr. Wolfe, I hope this is not a circus. It is not, Wolfe replied. But if it were, madam, I assure you I would not cast you as a clown. Archie Goodwin, internal chuckle, external professionalism. Wolfe leaned back. We begin. He pointed a finger, not accusatory yet, toward Christine Lorne. You, Dr. Lorne, used Leonard Ray's identification badge in the refrigerated vault corridor. Why? Christine straightened. Holt asked me to retrieve donor data. He insisted on anonymity. He feared someone was stealing antigen samples. Wolfe nodded. And you obeyed without question? She hesitated. He was my superior. Your caution is noted. You are not the killer. Philip March let out an audible exhale that made Christine glare at him. Wolfe's eyes moved to March. Mr. March, your behaviour suggested guilt. You fled when Mr. Goodwin approached you. March twitched. I told you, I owe money. A debt collector came to the gala. I wasn't fleeing murder. I was fleeing bankruptcy. Indeed. Wolfe's tone was dry as an old encyclopedia. Your debts are deplorable but not homicidal. March sagged into his chair. Wolfe turned to the research tech. You, sir, attempted to destroy records. The young man stammered. I didn't know. They paid me. I just followed instructions. I didn't even read the files. And if you had? Wolfe asked. I don't understand blood stuff, he whimpered. I barely understand my job. Wolfe dismissed him with a blink. Your ignorance saves you. Then came the heavier turn. Wolfe shifted his weight, a subtle motion, but in Wolfland practically theatrics. Holt, Wolfe said, voice lowering, was not the righteous whistleblower some imagined. He accepted payments, significant ones. Gasps peppered the room. Marion's expression didn't change, but her eyes flickered. Ah, Wolfe murmured. The audience reacts. Holt blackmailed, but he also sold access to sensitive donor data. I added, through charitable accounts linked to someone in this room. Kramer's head moved slightly. He was waiting. Wolfe placed both hands on the desk. But Holt was murdered, not by the indebted, nor by the ignorant, nor by the obedient. His death served one purpose, silencing his knowledge about a donor whose identity was more valuable than any blood vial. Marion's fingers tightened on her stole. Wolfe let the silence simmer like Fritz's custard cooling. Patient 0, Wolfe said, voice nearly a whisper, the wartime donor whose rare antigen profile could save thousands. Their identity was safeguarded to prevent exploitation, yet someone here feared exposure enough to kill. Christine looked momentarily startled. March paled. The board members stiffened. Marion Vance stared straight ahead. Too straight. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Marion Vance. The room twitched as if someone had yanked a wire. Marion didn't blink. Mr. Wolfe, I hardly think. You killed Dr. Holt, Wolfe said, because he learned the truth. You poisoned Leonard Ray because he investigated the falsified disbursements Holt was using to blackmail you, and you attempted to destroy all traces of Patient Zero's identity. That is preposterous, she said, but her voice trembled just enough to make Saul Panzer, standing by the door, shift his weight. Wolfe continued, relentless. Your motive was simple. Protect Patient Zero, for the donor was a high-profile wartime figure whose reputation could not survive revelation, someone whose blood enabled wartime medical miracles, but whose political secrets would have detonated scandals in every major newspaper. Kramer leaned forward. Name, Wolfe gestured toward Marion. She will tell you. I will not, Marion said, spine rigid. You already have, Wolfe replied. Your desperation revealed more than words. He glanced at me. Archie, relay your observations. I stepped forward. The smell of your perfume, Mrs. Vance, the same fragrance that hit me when I visited your penthouse, was on the hospital visitor log where the sedation schedule for Leonard Ray was altered. Marion's face twitched barely. I added, I smelled the same perfume in the vault corridor the night someone used solvent to destroy blood records. You tried to mask it with disinfectant, but even disinfectant has limits. The research tech spoke up timidly. The envelope I got, it smelled like her perfume. Marion shot him a look that could slice cartilage. Kramer's jaw tightened. Anything else, Goodwin? Sure, I said. Her little meeting at the gala, slipping envelopes, whispering with techs, looked innocent then. But tonight, not so much. Wolfe resumed with ceremonial weight. You visited Leonard Ray's hospital room hours before his collapse. You left his chart altered in a manner consistent with a sedation schedule change. The attending nurse confirmed a woman matching your description. Marion finally stirred. He, Leonard, was going to expose everything. The donor had to remain hidden, for their own safety, for national stability, for yourself, Wolfe said. You were not protecting the donor. You were protecting the legacy you built around them. Christine looked shocked. March looked grateful. Any killer besides him was welcome. Marion slumped slightly. I tried to stop Holt. He threatened to reveal everything. I offered him money. He wanted more. He said he'd destroy everything I'd built. Her voice grew brittle. I could not allow that. And Leonard Ray? I asked softly. She closed her eyes. He was too close. He knew the ledger's value. He knew something about Patient Zero that no one else could discover. The board members whispered furiously. The research tech looked ready to faint. Saul remained stone-faced. Wolfe's tone became grave. Madam, concealment has ended. Justice must proceed. Marion's composure cracked. Tears gathered, not dramatic, just defeated. Please, she whispered. Not publicly. You don't know what this will do. Kramer rose, solemn as a sermon. Mrs. Vance, he said gently, I'm placing you under arrest for the murders of Dr. Avery Holt and Leonard Ray. She didn't resist. She didn't scream. She simply folded her hands as if preparing for a long car ride. Kramer signaled Stebbins, who'd waited in the kitchen for the cue. Stebbins entered quietly, cuffs in hand. As they escorted Marion out, she turned once toward Wolfe. "You could have stayed silent. You had no duty to expose me." Wolfe met her gaze steadily. "Madam, my duty is to truth. Silence would be complicity." She nodded faintly. Then she was gone. The room held its breath. Stir. Christine Lorne murmured something about tragedy. March wiped his face with a shaking hand. The board members whispered damage control scripts. The tech looked ready to renounce science altogether. Kramer approached Wolfe. "You were right," he said quietly. "Damn it." Wolfe inclined his head in acknowledgement. No gloating, just gravity. Kramer left next, cigar still unlit. When the last of them were gone, Wolfe let out a long, weary breath. "Archie." "Yes, sir?" "Beer." I fetched it. Fritz delivered the chilled glass with a solemn nod. Wolfe took one deep drink, set it down, and closed his eyes. "I abhor blood," he murmured. "But tonight, I abhor secrecy more." I didn't wisecrack. Some nights deserve silence. There are days when the brownstone feels like the safest place on earth, and others when it feels like a museum of regrets. The morning after Marion Vance was taken away, the air inside Wolfe's office carried a heaviness that had nothing to do with humidity. Wolfe sat in his chair at 10:14 a.m., staring at the empty space above the globe as though the universe had personally let him down. I'd seen him annoyed, irate, affronted, and occasionally smug, but brooding was a rarer dish, served only when the human race managed to disappoint him in a particularly creative manner. He finally spoke. "Phooey." "That bad?" I asked. "Archie," he said, rubbing his forehead with 2 fingers. "The waste. The absurd, needless waste. Human blood, human folly, human vanity, each spilling into the next like dye in water." "Cheer up," I said. "At least no one tried to poison you." "That is not cheering." "Then I'll keep working on my material." He ignored me and resumed brooding. If brooding were an Olympic sport, Wolfe would occupy the top podium and refuse to step down. By lunchtime, the mood hadn't improved. Fritz brought braised duck, marinated overnight, cooked with oranges, herbs, and a glaze subtle enough to make angels jealous. Wolfe normally regarded braised duck as a personal friend. Today he poked it like it had offended him. "You're eating like a man who misplaced his optimism," I said. He glared. "I am eating, and I do not misplace anything." "Sure," I said, "except hope for humanity." He stabbed a piece of duck with unusual vehemence. Fritz noticed and sent me a worried look, as if I'd done something to destabilize Wolfe's mood by existing. I shrugged. The limits of my influence are well documented. The bell rang precisely at 1:46 p.m. I answered it because Fritz would sooner commit treason than answer the door. Inspector Kramer stood there, coat dusted with wind and aggravation. "Goodwin," he said. "He in?" "He's digesting disappointment with a side of duck, but come on." Kramer entered, hat tucked under his arm. When he stepped into the office, he surprised us both by removing the cigar from his mouth and tucking it into his pocket. "Wolfe," he said gruffly, "I've got updates." Wolfe gestured half-heartedly to the red chair. Kramer sat, elbows on knees, as if the weight of the department was resting on his spine. "It's done," he said. "Marion Vance confessed fully. Named names, gave documents, the whole works. DA's satisfied. Said to tell you that your deductions saved us weeks, maybe months." Wolfe inclined his head, slowly, like a king acknowledging tribute. But there was no triumph in his expression, only a quiet indignation at the necessity of the whole affair. Kramer continued. "Medical boards keeping the patient zero identity sealed permanently. Press will get a sanitized statement. Vance's lawyers are pushing for mental duress. Won't go far." "Justice," Wolfe murmured, "is never tidy." Kramer stood. "Anyway, thanks. And don't make me repeat that." I smirked. "I'll embroider it on a pillow." "Goodwin," Kramer barked. "Try that and I'll—" He stopped, sighed, and shook his head. "Good night, Wolfe." Wolfe raised a hand in solemn farewell. Kramer left without slamming the door. That alone deserved a headline. The afternoon was spent juggling phone calls, mostly from Lon Cohen, the Gazette's resident antenna for scandal. He'd read the partial statement released by the DA and wanted the juicy version only Wolfe could give. I, as Wolfe's official no, had to disappoint him repeatedly. "Archie," Lon said on the 5th call, Did Wolfe really bust open a wartime medical conspiracy? Lon, I said, if Wolfe ever busts open anything, it's going to be a jar of olives. Public opinion's messy right now, Lon warned. Some people think Wolfe interfered with medical philanthropy. Wonderful, I said. Tell them we'll be hosting a bake sale to restore their faith. Archie. Fine. Tell them Wolfe acted responsibly, saved lives, and turned down the chance to appear on a radio panel about universal blood research. Lon laughed. Oh, I'm printing that. When I relayed the autograph request drifting in from half-informed fans, Wolfe shot me a glare sharp enough to etch glass. Confound you, he said. Do not bring me trivialities. They're not trivial, I said. They're annoying. Entirely different category. He grunted. Translation. He cared more than he wanted to admit. By 4:00 p.m., the operatives began arriving for final settlement. Saul came first, as calm as always. Fred followed, his face splitting into a relieved grin when Wolfe handed him his envelope. Ori arrived last, trying to look unimpressed by his fee, but failing. Nice to know risking frostbite in refrigerated vaults still pays, Ori said. It pays because Saul did most of the thinking, I said. Saul gave me a mild smile. Archie exaggerates. No, I said, but keep pretending. It makes Ori feel better. Ori scowled. One of these days. Gentlemen, Wolfe interrupted. Your labours were appreciated. You may retire. They filed out, pockets heavier, pride intact. I was about to enjoy a quiet minute when Wolfe motioned me closer. Archie, the Foundation will settle my account tomorrow. Even with Marion's assets frozen? The board panicked. They prefer my discretion to further embarrassment. Well, congratulations, I said. You've achieved the rare feat of making rich people pay for their own mess. Wolfe sighed. I do not take joy in profiting from tragedy. Then let me do it for you. Phooey. Dinner that night, braised duck leftovers converted by Fritz into a miraculous second act, was eaten in relative silence. Wolfe chewed slowly, frowning between bites. I watched him, trying to decide if talking would soothe him or endanger me. At 8:27 p.m. he set down his fork. Archie. Yes? He folded his hands. Blood is an instrument of life, yet men, fools, treat it as commodity, leverage, currency. The price grows higher with every generation. You're brooding again. I have cause. You want the bright side, I offered. We stopped a conspiracy, saved future donors, prevented a scandal that could have splashed across every newspaper from here to San Francisco. Wolfe tilted his head. And what consolation is that to Leonard Ray? I didn't have an answer. Some questions land like punches you can't dodge. We cleared the table. Fritz collected plates with respectful quiet. The dining room doors closed softly behind him. Wolfe retreated to the office, and I followed. He lowered himself into his chair with a grunt, reached for a book, then stopped. He looked at me, really looked, the way he does when he's about to make my life impossible or strangely touching. Archie, he said quietly, I am gratified you survived your escapades. For a man who measures affection in micrometers, that was practically a declaration of devotion. I stood there, thrown off my rhythm. Well, I said, coming home alive is part of my job description. You make it sound routine. It is routine. I do dangerous things. You get indigestion. It balances. He snorted. Your levity is incorrigible. And your concern is showing, I said. Careful, or I'll start thinking you like me. Confound you. He opened his book. I sat at the typewriter and began drafting the report Kramer requested. Outside, Manhattan hummed its usual evening tune, blissfully unaware of the secrets it had nearly swallowed whole. By 9:12 p.m., Wolfe had settled into reading, beer in hand, the lines of tension easing from his face. The brownstone felt steady again, solid, certain, our small island against the chaos outside. The orchids upstairs rustled faintly in the night air, waiting for morning. Fritz hummed somewhere in the kitchen. Everything was back where it belonged. Cases end. People leave. Blood dries. But Wolfe and I remained, orbiting each other in our peculiar universe. Irritation, loyalty, stubborn affection, and justice stitched into the walls like permanent wallpaper. And as I finished the final line of my report, Wolfe spoke without looking up. Archie. Yes, sir? Do not risk yourself so freely. Sorry, I said. That's not how I'm wired. he grunted. Phooey. But the book stayed open, the beer half drained, and the office warm enough to feel like a victory. The brownstone closed around us gently, safe, steady, and full of unsaid affection beneath the banter.